What if I told you that the way you format an Excel spreadsheet or, the way you organize a project timeline says just as much about your fundamental worldview as what you might do on a Sunday morning?
I mean, it sounds a little extreme at first, right?
Right. But we all sort of live with this giant invisible cubicle wall running straight down the center of our existence. On one side of the wall, you have your real life, your spirituality, your deepest convictions, your weekend self.
Yeah, the stuff that actually matters to you.
Exactly. And on the other side, well, you have a 9 to 5, the commute, the endless cascade of emails, the mundane tasks, and we just sort of accept this tragic idea that these two sides of the wall will never actually touch.
Yeah, we think work is just, a necessary evil to fund the rest of our lives. It creates this deeply fragmented identity.
Oh, totally.
We clock in and we just assume we're required to leave our higher purpose at the security desk. We treat our professional lives as this entirely secular, mechanical endeavor that is just, well, completely devoid of any deeper meaning.
But what if that wall is a complete illusion? Welcome to the deep dive. Whether you are listening to this on your morning commute, or maybe pacing your living room, prepping for a massive meeting, or just staring at your laptop trying to figure out why your daily grind feels so hollow right now, this deep dive is custom tailored for you.
It really is.
Today, we're pulling from a really fascinating stack of historical analyses, theological commentaries, and workplace studies to solve what I think is a modern crisis of meaning. Our mission today, we want to completely tear down that invisible wall between quote-unquote secular work and divine calling.
And to do that, we have to examine history. We need to look at how highly specialized professional training literally alters a person's worldview.
Right.
Instead of just theorizing about it, we're going to look at real historical figures who operate at the absolute top of their fields.
Yeah.
We're talking people in medicine, construction, corporate trade. And we'll see how their professional lenses were completely fused with their sense of calling.
So I want to start with the medical side, because looking at the texts we have, the idea that a specialized career changes how you perceive reality is just fascinating to me. The primary case study we have here is Luke, the ancient physician.
Yes, great example.
But I have to push back a little from the jump, because when we think of a first century doctor, my mind immediately goes to a guy applying leeches or prescribing crushed beetles. How much of a professional lens did he actually have?
That is such a common misconception.
Hmm.
But a first-century medicine in the Greco-Roman world was actually remarkably sophisticated, albeit very different from today, obviously.
Okay.
Luke was almost certainly a Gentile who belonged to a literate, educated elite. He had the immense benefit of an extensive classical education and was very likely affiliated with the Hippocratic Guild.
Oh, wow. So he was legit.
Highly legit. These were physicians who relied on observation, diagnosis, and prognosis. Because of this rigorous background, Luke didn't write his historical accounts in broad, sweeping emotional strokes. He wrote like a clinician.
Right. He wasn't just writing poetry.
Exactly. In fact, in Luke 1.3, he actually outlines his methodology right at the start. He states that he, quote, carefully investigated everything from the beginning.
He's basically conducting ancient qualitative research. He's not just passing down folklore around a campfire. He is interviewing the eyewitnesses, looking at the data, cross-referencing the timelines, and charting the findings.
And he's doing it with a very specific ethical framework, too. A major issue in the ancient medical community was arrogance. Many elite physicians of that era were only interested in treating the wealthy, the social elite, who could pay handsomely or boost their social status.
Makes sense. Follow the money.
Right. But Luke brings a totally different diagnostic focus. If you read his accounts, he focuses intensely on the socially inferior. He records granular clinical details about the frail, the leprosy sufferers, and he places a radical emphasis on the physical and social restoration of women, which was completely countercultural for a patriarchal society.
Yeah, that's a huge shift.
But the most revealing part of his clinical lens, and this is where it gets really good, is his fascination with the Greek word sozo.
Yes. The concept of sozo is one of the most compelling pieces of this entire study. Unpack that word for us, because it really changes everything about how we view his writing.
So the Greek word sozo carries this profound dual meaning. It translates to both to save and to heal.
Save and heal.
Right. It's used for rescuing someone from eternal peril, but also for curing a person of a severe physical disease. And because of his medical background, Luke was just captivated by this overlap.
I saw the connection.
He uniquely recognized that when he was investigating the miracles of Jesus, Physical healing and spiritual salvation were not separate events. They were completely intertwined. He viewed Jesus as a savior healer who confronted physical disease and spiritual oppression with the exact same authority.
It makes me think of a modern holistic doctor who refuses to just set a patient's broken bone, right?
Hmm.
They insist on treating the underlying psychological trauma that maybe caused the accident in the first place.
That's a perfect analogy.
When Luke observes a miracle, he isn't just looking at a magic trick meant to impress a crowd. His professional training allows him to make a clinical observation of complete, holistic human restoration.
Exactly.
But this raises a major question for me. Luke is using his earthly clinical skills to piece together historical evidence. He is working bottom up, investigating things after they have already happened. What about those of us who aren't historians or investigators? What if your job is to build something completely new from scratch?
Well, that takes us to the complete opposite end of the spectrum.
Yeah.
If Luke is the bottom-up, earthly investigator looking backward, the Old Testament provides a stunning example of top-down, forward-looking creation, and we find it in the architectural and engineering craftsmanship of a man named Bezalel.
The master contractor of the ancient world.
Yes, that is the perfect title for him. So, in Exodus 31.36, instructions are being handed down for the construction of the tabernacle.
And this wasn't just a simple camping tent.
Not at all. It was a massive, mobile, highly complex temple complex requiring the modern equivalent of millions of dollars worth of gold, silver, bronze, and precious stones.
Wow.
And God explicitly points out Bezalel to lead the project. He states, I have filled him with the Spirit of God, in wisdom and in understanding and in knowledge and in all manner of workmanship.
Okay, I want to pause right there because this is the moment that invisible wall between the sacred and the secular really starts to crack. Because when you or I think of the Holy Spirit, we usually picture, I don't know, a deeply emotional moment in a church service.
Right.
Someone preaching a fiery sermon or intense moment of prayer. We do not picture the Spirit of God acting as a master metalworker, an architect, or a stonecutter.
No, we really don't. It completely shatters our modern categories of what is sacred. And the Hebrew words used to describe Bezalel's gifts are incredibly specific and technical. Well, wisdom in this context meant the power to invent and originate complex artistic forms. Understanding was the ability to grasp architectural nuances. Knowledge was the intimate physical acquaintance with the brutal methods and processes of ancient metallurgy and woodwork.
So it isn't like the Spirit just hijacked his hands and treated him like a mindless puppet.
Not at all. It's more like a talented musician who has spent years memorizing scales suddenly being handed a priceless Stradivarius violin. The natural skill, the calluses on the fingers, the hours of practice, that is all human.
Yeah, he put in the work.
Exactly. But suddenly the resonance and the output are elevated to a completely different transcendent level. God didn't just hand Bezalel a prefabricated tent. He supernaturally enhanced Bezalel's natural capacities and mechanical genius so he could execute complex engineering with absolute excellence.
The historical texts we are looking at dive deep into theologians like John Calvin and Abraham Kuyper on this, and frankly, my mind is a little blown by Calvin's take.
It is surprising, isn't it?
It really is. We usually think of John Calvin as this austere, incredibly strict theologian focused on predestination. I did not expect him to be the patron saint of secular artists and engineers.
Calvin's writings on this are actually quite revolutionary.
Yeah.
He argued that Exodus 31 definitively proves the Holy Spirit does not restrict its inspiration to sermons or prophecy.
Wow.
Yeah, the Spirit actively distributes gifts of science, architecture, mathematics, and art to the broader human race for the common good. Calvin specifically noted that no one excels even in the most despised, dirty, and humble handicraft except insofar as the Spirit works in them.
That is beautiful.
And then Abraham Kuyper later expanded on this, arguing that this divine energy shines in every vocation, every office, and every human endeavor.
Think about the implications of that for you listening right now. If you are a civil engineer, a graphic designer, a plumber, or an accountant, your ability to code a functional app or balance a complex ledger isn't just some secular party trick you picked up to pay your mortgage. According to this theological framework, that very skill is a tangible manifestation of divine gifts. But, okay, I have to play devil's advocate here.
Go for it.
Basil was building a literal tabernacle, a house for God. That still feels suspiciously like church work, you know? What about a purely secular corporate environment? Let's talk about the boardroom in the marketplace, because most of us are not building golden temples.
That is a crucial distinction. To understand marketplace excellence, we have to look at historical powerhouses who operated in entirely secular, sometimes outright hostile economies. Let's look at Paul the Apostle.
Okay, let's look at Paul.
Modern culture remembers him entirely as a preacher and a writer of letters. But Acts 18.3 and 1 Thessalonians 2.9 remind us that he was a tent maker. He was a Lego worker by trade.
And reading the context of the sources, he wasn't just doing some light crafting on the side to pay the bills. Leather working in the ancient world was a grueling, foul-smelling, physically demanding job. He was elbow deep in the dirt and the noise of the local economy.
He was deeply embedded in the marketplace. Paul states that he worked night and day practicing his trade, and that secular job gave him a natural, unforced window into the daily lives of the working class.
He was rubbing shoulders with regular people.
Exactly. He built relationships, negotiated contracts, and engaged with a massive demographic of people who would never, ever step foot in a synagogue on the Sabbath. His secular excellence was the very vehicle for his mission.
That is so interesting, and we see a very similar dynamic with Lydia in Acts 16, but on the completely opposite end of the socioeconomic spectrum. Lydia's story is fascinating. She wasn't a preacher. She was the equivalent of a high-level corporate executive. The text tells us she was a dealer in purple cloth from the city of Thyatira.
Yes, and to understand her status, you really have to understand the commodity she was selling. Purple dye in the ancient Roman world was a luxury good. It was painstakingly extracted drop by drop from the murex shellfish.
Just a crazy process.
It was astronomically expensive, heavily regulated, and worn by royalty and the extreme elite. So for Lydia to be a dealer in this specific market meant she was a woman of immense economic power. She was navigating high-stakes trade routes and dealing with the upper echelons of society.
And because of her business acumen, she had acquired significant wealth and a large estate in Philippi. The text notes that she had a very persuasive, confident business personality. She actually prevailed upon Paul and his companions to stay at her house.
She knew how to close a deal.
She really did. She used the material wealth, the resources, and the leadership skills gained entirely through her secular corporate work to practice radical hospitality. She literally bankrolled the early spread of the gospel in Europe.
Her business experience instilled this rare combination of humility and decisive confidence. She didn't abandon her business when she became a believer. She leveraged it. And if we look even further back in the historical text, we find figures like Daniel and Joseph who take this concept to the extreme.
Oh, yeah.
They weren't just working in secular markets. They were operating in the most hostile, toxic, foreign corporate environments imaginable, the empires of Babylon and Egypt.
I mean, Babylon literally conquered Daniel's people. He was dragged there as a captive. Talk about a hostile corporate takeover. How do you navigate the moral complexities of working for an empire that actively opposes everything you believe in?
Well, you do it through undeniable competence. Daniel 1.4 tells us that Daniel and his friends were skillful in our wisdom, endowed with knowledge, understanding, learning, and competent to stand in the king's palace. They didn't retreat into a religious bubble.
They leaned in.
They actively studied the literature, the language, and the sciences of the Chaldeans. They engaged with the secular culture deeply. And then Daniel 6.3 says Daniel became distinguished above all the other officials because an excellent spirit was in him.
He didn't succeed by being the loudest religious voice in the room, constantly complaining about the ethics of the Babylonian administration. He succeeded by being exceptionally, undeniably good at his secular job. He cared about the details of statecraft and administration.
And Joseph did the exact same thing in Egypt. He was a strategic master planner who analyzed agricultural data to set up Egypt for a massive famine years before it happened. Whether he was managing a prison as an inmate or acting as the second in command to Pharaoh, he applied his skills with absolute excellence.
Which brings us to a really major conclusion in modern theology of work, right?
Yes, the concept of full-time Christian service being limited to pastors or missionaries is a modern distortion.
The idea that being a pastor is somehow higher on the spiritual ladder than being an operations manager, a physician, or a politician.
Exactly. In the biblical worldview, that hierarchy does not exist. Colossians 3.23 commands believers to put their entire soul into their tasks as done for the Lord, regardless of the job title.
So where did we get this hierarchy?
Well, the monastic traditions of the Middle Ages warped this idea, elevating the isolated contemplative life over the active secular life of commerce and family. But the sources we are analyzing overwhelmingly agree. The calling to non-church work is just as intense and just as sacred as the calling to church work.
Okay, let's bring this down to the ground for the person listening right now. If all work is sacred and there is no hierarchy, how do you actually discern what your specific calling is? Because staring at a completely open horizon can feel incredibly paralyzing.
It really can. But the historical texts and modern theologians outline three very practical guides for discerning your vocational path. The first guide is simply looking at the needs of the world. And we need to be careful here. This doesn't automatically mean moving across the globe to solve a massive geopolitical crisis. It starts much closer to home. It starts with providing for your family. Proverbs 13.22 and 1 Timothy 5.8 emphasize the profound dignity of simply working to provide for your relatives and leaving an inheritance. From there, you look around your immediate community, what simply needs getting done that you are uniquely positioned to do.
There is a story in the research about a waste management foreman. He runs behind a garbage truck at 3 in the morning in the freezing cold. It is grueling, physically punishing, totally unglamorous work.
Yeah.
But he realizes that if he and his crew don't do it, waste builds up, disease spreads, and it becomes a severe health risk for the entire city. So he views his sanitation job as a sacred, essential service to his neighbors.
That is a perfect example of meeting the needs of the world. Now, the second guide involves examining your skills and gifts. 1 Corinthians 12 discusses how the Spirit gives different manifestations for the common good. We all possess a mix of natural and Spirit-given talents.
Like Bezalel.
It's exactly like Bezalel. If you had an incredible mind for data analysis or a natural empathy for customer service, those are gifts meant to be utilized, much like his metalworking. You have a responsibility to deploy the specific tools you've been given.
But we also have to balance that, right? Because I know some people who get entirely obsessed with personality tests and gift analysis, waiting for the perfect alignment before they ever take a job. Sometimes you just take a job out of necessity and you develop the skills along the way.
Which is why the third guide is essential. Your truest desires. There is a brilliant thought from the writer Frederick Buchner that perfectly synthesizes this. He wrote, "The place God calls you to is where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet."
I love that quote so much.
It's powerful because there is a pervasive myth that a divine calling must be something you absolutely hate doing, as if misery is a requirement for holiness. The reality is that a deep, persistent desire in your heart for a certain type of work is often a compass pointing toward your calling.
I love that Buchner framework. But even with those three guides, I know so many people who treat their career path like a rigid, unforgiving GPS route. They are terrified that if they make one wrong turn or take a job that turns out to be a dead end or pick the wrong college major, they have completely derailed their destiny and missed their divine calling forever.
And that specific anxiety is exactly where the theology brings in the ultimate reassurance, the concept of freedom in Christ. John 8.36 declares, "If the Son makes you free, you will be free indeed." The profound truth is that securing the perfect job title isn't actually the point of your life.
It's not the end goal.
No. The point is serving the common good and reflecting excellence wherever you happen to find yourself. There was actually a massive historical debate over this between Martin Luther and John Calvin, centering on 1 Corinthians 7.20.
That is the verse that says, "Let each of you remain in the condition in which you were called," correct?
Yes. During the Reformation, Martin Luther interpreted that verse as a rigid, static command. He translated the Greek word kleisai as a literal, unchangeable occupation.
Oh,
Yeah, in Luther's view, whatever job you held when you found your faith, you were obligated to stay in it forever. But John Calvin and the vast majority of modern theologians pushed back hard against that interpretation. They pointed out that in the very next verse, Paul explicitly tells enslaved people that if they can gain their freedom, they should absolutely take the opportunity to improve their station.
so it is not a rigid trap. It is an invitation to bloom where you are planted, but with the total freedom to move, pivot, or innovate if a new opportunity arises.
Exactly. The core focus is that your fundamental allegiance has changed, not that your specific job title is locked in stone for the next 40 years. Your capabilities will grow, markets will shift, God might guide you to change careers entirely. But ultimately, executing today's work to the absolute best of your ability is infinitely more important than paralyzing yourself hunting for the perfect role.
Right.
Look at Zacchaeus, the wealthy tax collector in the Gospels. After his encounter with Jesus, the narrative doesn't say he quit his job in finance. The implication is that he simply started doing it with radical justice and integrity.
So, synthesizing everything we have unpacked today, We started with Luke, the physician, utilizing his rigorous, elite medical training to meticulously investigate historical data, recognizing that physical healing and spiritual salvation were beautifully intertwined in the word sozo.
And then we contrasted that with Bezalel.
Right. Bezalel receiving supernatural enhancement of his engineering and artistic skills to build a magnificent tabernacle. Then we moved to the secular marketplaces, with Paul sewing leather tents to access new communities, and Lydia using her luxury textile wealth to bankroll a movement.
And we saw Daniel and Joseph thriving in the toxic, hostile corporate structures of Babylon and Egypt, not through religious complaining, but through undeniable competence and excellent spirit.
The sources overwhelmingly agree that human labor, whether it is medical research, construction, corporate finance, or waste management, when done with excellence and a spirit of service, is a direct manifestation of the divine. There is no secular versus sacred. The cubicle wall is an illusion.
Which leaves us with one final, totally new frontier to consider.
Okay, let's hear it.
We have established that the Spirit of God can be actively manifested in the calluses of Bezalel's hands and in the meticulous charting of Luke's medical journals. If that divine spark is present in human craftsmanship, what happens when artificial intelligence enters the workplace?
Oh, man.
Right. If an algorithm can format your spreadsheets, draft your emails, or even diagnose a patient, does that mundane work lose its divine spark? Or does the rise of AI force us to redefine what truly makes human work sacred, pushing us to elevate our creativity, our empathy, and our moral courage to an even higher, deeply spiritual level?
That is an incredibly profound question. It forces us to ask what it truly means to be human in a mechanized world. Think about that the next time you sit down at your desk and open your laptop. You aren't just clocking in to survive the 9 to 5 a fee. You're practicing a craft with eternal resonance. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep learning, keep questioning, and we will see you next time as we continue tearing down the walls between what we do and who we are.